full of we can teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with lies they eat like comfort food. To disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims. Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace with ilkas and plots and shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was normal to have to prove a claim you make. And folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes. It's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road of reason. Stay strapped with logic and fast. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth grow. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road of reason.
Hi, I'm Rob Penzak.
And I'm Larry Mendoza.
Welcome to Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. Today we're going to have a spectacular guest, but he is not that guy that you're going to see up on the screen in just a second. That's actually my middle child, Hayden, who is going to be demonstrating something while Larry and I discuss some news. Then we'll be back with our real guest, one of the preeminent evolutionary biologists in the world, Dr. Jerry Coyne. That'll be in just a few minutes. So Larry, why don't we start off with what's going on in Mississippi?
Oh, Mississippi, sure. So, well, actually Mississippi and Texas. We can start with Mississippi. Recently, Mississippi decided to amend the state constitution, I believe, into establishing a religion. Christianity, obviously.
Surprise. So
they want to basically establish a religion in defiance of the First Amendment clause.
So I thought they don't defy it because they declare that they're not defying it. Is that how they're...
Right. So what they're saying is the way they want to word the amendment is as follows, and then we can chat about that in a minute. But the state of Mississippi hereby acknowledges the fact of her identity as a principally Christian and quintessentially Southern state in terms of the majority of her population, character, culture, history, and heritage from 1817 to the present. And accordingly, the Holy Bible is acknowledged as a foremost source of her founding principles, inspiration, and virtues. And accordingly, prayer is acknowledged as a respected, meaningful, and valuable custom of her citizens. Now, here's where it gets really good. The acknowledgments hereby secured shall not be construed to transgress either the national or the state constitution's Bill of Rights.
It's a good thing they put that clause in there.
In other words, you know, it doesn't violate the Constitution because we're just saying it doesn't, even though it really is. Right. So that's one, you know, it's interesting because that's one way that states, the Christian right wing is trying to erode the separation of church and state clause. They're trying to, they're trying to use their numbers and trying to pass these clearly unconstitutional laws. They're hoping that this amendment is going to be on the 2016 ballot. As a ballot initiative. And the thing about ballot initiatives is that, yes, you might get the majority of the population to vote for it, but clearly in court when it gets sued, which will clearly be challenged in court, you know, we would think we have judges who would have enough sense to shut
Unless
this down.
It goes to the Supreme Court, which is kind of stacked and might well go along with that. But you know, it's funny just to note that you can affect state politics and certainly more local politics where these billionaires can throw money around and really change things. And this is what happens. You know, this is you want to protect states' rights, but what do you do when states are doing this kind of stuff?
Right, and that's the whole age-old argument, you know, states' rights versus the federal government. And a lot of these people, these same type of people who want to erode the federal government, you know, this is what would happen, for example, in the state of Mississippi if you just allowed, you know, and this essentially would try to disenfranchise, you know, thousands of atheists in the state, Jewish people, Buddhists, you know, Muslims. You know, it's clearly
always,
very scary.
It's always floated as that freedom of religion, and then it always comes down to Christianity is the religion.
Freedom of religion with a wink, wink. Is
and also,
the way
they also throw
works.
in that bigotry about, and you don't have to press one for English anymore.
Oh, that's the other. I think another amendment or another ballot initiative they want to pass is they want to establish English as the official state language, so that you know, you know, there's no more.
I didn't know it passed. I thought they were just throwing that in as just like
a
jab. Tell us what's going on in Texas, so we don't think Mississippi is the only place.
Well, yeah, I mean, Mississippi, Texas is another. In Texas, they just recently, the school board, okay, the Board of Education of Texas, this is going to affect millions of children, if not children outside of Texas, have voted in new history books which mention Moses as being one of the foremost influential persons that influenced our founding fathers. In other words, they want to make sure that the Ten Commandments, Moses, biblical history, is ingrained within our history textbooks so that our kids learn where our laws come from. And of course, what is the end game here? Well, you know, what's been one of the big controversies recently has been Ten Commandments on courthouses. Well, you know, they're not just attacking it from that perspective. They're going after the kids through public education and trying to ingrain the Ten Commandments as being part of our laws and our founding fathers'
and
views.
that's one of those little sleights of hands that you'll see with religious apologists, that it might start out, somebody could say, well, sure, I guess if the Bible and the Old Testament was what everybody thought, maybe people were influenced it in some way,
right.
But the end game is exactly what you're saying. And this is something that apologists do all the time, is they'll show you like a little piece of the puzzle, and they'll keep it covered so you only see exactly what you want.
Right.
It's like, we've got this all figured out. And the reason I showed that video, which I actually missed because I was listening to you, but that was my, when my son was 10, he went on YouTube and learned the algorithm to solve the Rubik's Cube, which is a complicated puzzle that you can spend hours doing. And now he's a little rusty because he hasn't done it, so it took him 3 minutes. But what science is science is an algorithm for actually discovering the truth, and it doesn't matter how you look at it. You can look at all the sides. In fact, science encourages you to look from all the different perspectives. You pull together all the different strains of evidence, and then you actually know that you've solved the puzzle. That's very different than apologists who like keep it all hidden, and they don't want to let you think, and they don't want to let you look. So again, science is an algorithm as opposed to just a body of knowledge.
And the Rubik's Cube is a great example at how, you know, you can solve problems in life using you know, science and methods. I mean, you know, your son, I think, did this in what, he could do it in a minute.
He used to be close to a minute when he was younger.
In a minute, and because there's a method, and once you figure out the method, you can solve the problems, and that's exactly what science is. It's not, you know, I mean, there's the philosophy of science, but in and of itself, and the empirical scientific method works, and as we've seen using the Rubik's Cube here. And yeah, sorry, I missed it too. I was talking and missed your son doing a Rubik's Cube.
So let's get back to this now. We're going to cut away for just a couple minutes to get some news from the infidel, a quick word from Richard Dawkins, and then we're going to be back with one of the leading evolutionary biologists in the country, Dr. Jerry Coyne.
With over 2,700 confirmed cases of Ebola within its borders, it's small wonder that the people in the nation of Liberia are going into panic mode. However, what may not have been expected is the way the Catholic and Anglican churches of a West African nation have glommed onto the spread of the disease to reignite anti-gay animus. Homosexual sex is already punishable under the law, and in 2012 the Liberian Senate discussed a bill which would have made sodomy a capital offense. However, violence against gays has escalated in recent months, and the new spate of attacks can be directly linked to the rhetoric espoused from Liberian pulpits and even in the press. In a statement to Liberian media, the Archbishop of the Catholic Church of Liberia, Louis Ziegler, said, "Where are we going as Liberians if we are advocating for homosexuality? Are we not calling for curses upon ourselves? These ideas, which are wholly unsupported by scientific and medical research, have caused terror amongst the Liberian gay community." As Leroy Ponpon, a gay resident of Monrovia, said, "Since church ministers declared Ebola was a plague sent by God to punish sodomy in Liberia, the violence towards gays has escalated. They're even asking for the death penalty. We are living in fear." In Roman Catholicism, the concept of original sin is not that humankind directly inherits the consequences of the fall of Adam as related in the book of Genesis. Rather, Catholic teaching says that since Adam sacrificed his innocent and holy nature in the Garden of Eden, he denied his progeny the grace of that perfection and the holiness which God had imbued upon him, effectively altering human nature to allow for a sinful character. In other words, the reason for the Catholic Church, the redemption of Christ, and the baptism of the devout is directly rooted in a literal interpretation of the biblical six-day creation account. The Church has been struggling to justify this position for years and has been forced into linguistic and philosophical gymnastics to defend it. Nowhere has this science denial been more demonstrable than in the Inquisition's trial and imprisonment of Galileo in 1663 on heresy charges. If the Earth revolves around the Sun, then geocentrism fails scrutiny and the creation story with it, so Galileo had to be silenced. Heliocentrism was banned by the Catholic Church until 1758, although volumes explaining the concept remained on the list of forbidden books until 1835. It wasn't until 1992 that Galileo was ultimately pardoned of his heresy charges. So, when Pope Francis spoke at the plenary assembly of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, which had gathered in the Vatican to discuss evolving concepts of nature, his recognition that evolution and the Big Bang Theory are facts made headlines. According to the Pope's interpretation of reality, evolution in nature is not inconsistent with the notion of creation, because evolution requires the creation of beings that evolve. The Pope described a chaotic universe created by a benevolent and loving God who included rules which scientists called constants. These rules, the Pope explained, led to the coalescing of galaxies and solar systems. They also provided for a system guided by a divine hand which allowed humanity and all other life to develop on Earth. This is not exactly totally new thinking for the Catholic Church. Pope Pius XII in 1950 and later Pope John Paul II in 1996 had strongly suggested that evolution theory does not contradict Catholic teaching, and Benedict XVI embraced intelligent design in 2005. Today the Church has a Pope that says the Big Bang cosmology and evolutionary theory don't contradict the intervention of a divine creator, but demands it.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube, and remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
All right, welcome back. Now it's our pleasure to bring Dr. Jerry Coyne on. As I said, he's a leader in the field of evolutionary biology, a professor at University of Chicago, Department of Ecology and Evolution, has a special interest in speciation. He's also a very outspoken advocate of the importance of, of science being scientific and not playing games with political mincing of words. So if something is not supported by science, Dr. Coyne will be one of the ones that points it out. That's something we're going to get into a little bit later. So Dr. Coyne, thank you for coming on the show.
Good to be here.
Okay. The first thing that I want to start off with is why evolution is true. There's a fabulous book on evolution, both for people that have already read a couple of books on evolution and are looking for more information, and for lay people. You make it very accessible for everybody, and you go into a lot of depth for people that already know a little bit. When you start this, though, you don't start your book off with the bleeding edge science that's going to dazzle us. You actually start off with a discussion of a court case, Kitzmiller et al. Versus Dover Area School District. Why did you feel you had to start that way?
Before I do start, I can't see you guys very well. Maybe the tech guy could. I can't see either of you. I just see sort of myself. So,
okay, they'll work on that.
Yeah, okay. So I started off with that simply because that's the motivation, really, to write the book. We live in a country in which about half of the citizens don't accept a scientific theory that's as well substantiated as the so-called theory of atoms or the theory of germs. And so readers might ask themselves, or potential readers might ask themselves, why do I need a book on the evidence for evolution? I don't need a book on the evidence for atoms or for bacteria or microbes. And I needed to explain to them that this is the one concept of science which is vehemently resisted by citizens of this country. And that's nowhere better instantiated than in the Dover trial of 2005, where the school tried to mandate intelligent design being taught in science classes. And so it was for that reason, and my sort of hope, which may have been a vain hope, that I could help change Americans' acceptance of evolution by giving them the facts, that motivated that book. I don't know how successful it was. It sold fine, but Americans are obdurately resistant to evolution because it violates certain of their religious beliefs.
Right, and we often see with the religious right that if the science doesn't fit their political or religious ideology, then they try to debunk it. And evolution certainly is not the only science that they're trying to silence. You know, climate change is another one. But what's interesting is, you have people like, that are not just the general public, but people making laws, judges. Antonin Scalia, thinks that the Bible should be viewed above all else. So, in writing this book, and you're one of, a few scientists. I've also met a lot of scientists who choose to remain, at least not as vocal about this issue as in fighting pseudo, science or things like intelligent design. In fear of being labeled as an atheist or as, angry towards Christians, So I guess, I got a two-point question. My first question is, you're writing this book. There's others who are. Do you think, or why is it that people are so resistant, even though there's so much information out there? Let's start with that.
Well, you answered that question yourself, which is religion. Global warming is opposed by a coalition of people, some religious people, but a lot of industrialists and people that aren't religious. It's because of political and financial reasons. Evolution is peculiar in all the sciences. Cosmology might be included in there, in that it has implications that directly contradict what they get from religion, the feeling that you're special, that you're singled out by God, that our species is something that was specifically designated to form in God's image, that morality has come from God. Evolution says now it must have been a product of culture and evolution, that naturalism reigns in the world and not supernaturalism. All these lessons that emanate from evolutionary biology are directly, they hit religion right in the solar plexus. So, that's why, and no other science does that except maybe for cosmology, but it's easy to come to terms with the Big Bang if you're religious. You can say, well, God started it all off and directed it.
And that's often...
You can say that with evolution, too, it seems.
Yeah, and that's the Big Bang is often...
You said at the I guess it was in the news, the Pope has finally admitted that evolution is God's way of creating creatures. That is a sort of mistake for him because it contradicts what the church's view has been for many years, but there's still the moral implications. There's still the view that humans have souls, that humans are made in God's image, that we're unique amongst all organisms. That can't be squared with evolution for most religious people.
Do you think that more atheists, or at least more scientists at least, should come out and defending, the science of evolution the way you do, the way Richard Dawkins and some others are doing? Do you feel there should be a moral obligation for us, because we're seeing the effects of maybe possibly years of not paying too much attention to the subject until now?
Well, I wouldn't say moral obligation. There's no moral obligation to oppose anything, I don't think, unless it's, I think that every scientist should take a stand on creationism in a public way. But people and most evolutionary biologists do. They may not do it in their classrooms. I don't do it much in my classrooms because it shades into going after religion, which is against the law in a public school. Fortunately, I don't teach in one. But what scientists are really cowardly about, in my view, is their failure to say that creationism basically is a problem that comes from religion. There is no creationism without religion. You have religions without creationism, like Unitarianism and certain liberal sects, but you never ever find a creationist who's not motivated by religious beliefs. Maybe one or two I've encountered in my career, and the failure to pinpoint that root problem, which leads to the tactic that you think that teaching people the facts is going to convert them to evolution, is not going to work. Right. I don't think it's going to work. It hasn't worked very well in this country, where the belief in creationism has held steady for the past 30 to 35 years. So, the root cause of creationism is religion, and that's where scientists are loath in taking up the responsibility. Scientific organizations will regularly issue statements that say, there's no contradiction between evolution and religion. They can live together. Look, here's what the Pope said, here's what somebody else said. But people in their hearts, they know that there is, because the implications of evolution are inimical to, what they think God tells them. And it's the failure to tackle that problem, because religion is a sacrosanct thing. You don't go after religion in this country, not even to the extent of saying that religion is the cause of creationism. It's the failure to recognize that which has led, I think, to wrong tactics in how to deal with creation.
There's a popular quote, I forgot who it's from, that America is very comfortable with the application of evolution, but it's the implications that they get hung up on. Can you comment on that? Like, is that a way we can approach it, where scientists could say, look, evolution is at the heart of this technology that we use, and this is why we need to believe it? And if we got that from a bunch of different types of scientists, if that would help, more Americans understand how.
Well, they've already done that. I mean, people are already justifying it. The classic example, of course, is antibiotic resistance in bacteria, which is a prima facie case of evolution by natural selection. You give drugs to the bugs and they get resistant to them because the ones that are sensitive die off. The other ones leave their genes. Herbicide resistance, pesticide resistance, those are all examples of evolution by natural selection. The public will accept those. I mean, a creationist will take antibiotics, for example, or will take a new one if the old one's failed. But they'll say, well, that's just microevolution.
Right.
It's just a bacteria changing into another bacteria. It's not a bacteria changing into a dog, which is the kind of thing that they demand to see before they'll accept evolution. I think it's a bit of an exaggeration to say that our country's scientific preeminence and our technology depends on accepting evolution. I mean, half of Americans don't. We're still the technologically best society in terms of innovation in the world. It's because evolution it plays a role in technology, but not a major role.
I guess that's an interesting dichotomy, though, that we still have a lot of top scientists, but we also have a lay public that some are very educated and some are completely uneducated or unwilling to absorb some of the science that's out there. Scientific literacy, what do you feel about that as a sort of big issue?
Yeah, that's a problem, but that's a general problem. Evolution is a special problem because even if you make the whole country scientifically literate, we're not that bad, actually. We're about average in terms of first world nations in scientific literacy, but we're really down at the bottom in terms of evolution. So even if you raise, the rising tide that lifts all boats won't lift the boat of evolution, because that's anchored in the mud of religion. So, just trying to make everybody more science friendly is not the way to get people to accept evolution. I mean, I wrote my book, it had some effect, but it was my realization that you're not going to get Americans accepting evolution wholesale until they give up religion, or at least the form of religion that opposes evolution, which is most forms of religion. That led to the book that I just finished writing. We can talk about that later.
Can we cut in for a second? I'd love to get to that, because we have so many questions. I know we're not going to get through any portion of them. I'd love to get back to you. We have a caller, Carla from Alexandria. Can you go ahead?
Oh, hi. First of all, I want to tell you that for some reason when I call in, I can't have a back and forth conversation because I have a landline phone, it echoes, so I'm going to just lay out 3 things. And am I pronouncing it correct? Is it Dr. Coyne?
Yep.
Okay. 3 things. Number 1, Einstein, who came up with all of these theories, he actually could not admit to himself, and I know about this, I've read about this and so on, that there was no great being called God or whatever, creator. He actually was terrified by the own theories that he came up with, which is unbelievable, scientific person. Then, 2,
could we take this one at a time? It sounds like you just have a sort of...
Okay, yes, I'm trying to listen on the phone, sweetie.
I don't hear a question. It's just a declaration.
Maybe you can address the widespread idea that Einstein believed in a personal God.
Well, that's clearly untrue. I mean, I've just gone over that in the Galley Proofs of my book. A rabbi wrote to him, I think it was Rabbi Goldstein. It's in Walter Isaacson's new biography of... actually, it's an old biography of Einstein. I asked him, I hear, could you tell me about what you think about God? I don't have the answer on the tip of my tongue, but he said something that, like, he thought that the idea of a personal God was ridiculous, and that was
no.
I'm sorry, ma'am, but I just corrected this in my God.
Oh, I'm sorry, because I'm hearing echoing. I'm trying to listen. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
How about your second question for Dr. Coyne?
Okay, the second thing is, if there is a God and we're made in God's image, okay, how long do humans live? Think of even people that have lived into be 110, 11, okay, which is really pretty outlandish. Then God should have passed away a way long time ago.
I don't know. What's your question?
My question is, do you agree with this?
What you just said doesn't make any sense to me, because humans have a finite lifetime. God should have passed away.
That's what I said.
God is a cultural construct that's passed from one generation into the next. So, religion and the idea of gods can last forever, no matter how short the human lifespan is.
Okay, how about one last quick one, because we got a lot of stuff to go through.
You know what? I don't know why this gentleman is arguing with me when I'm an atheist, and I didn't get to see the first few minutes of the show, but I don't understand why he's arguing with me that Einstein was an idiot who came up with these scientific theories, but that he refused to accept himself.
Well, I didn't say Einstein was an idiot, and
I'm saying he was.
Sorry?
I'm saying that how can he come up with theories that he then refutes because he can't personally accept his scientific theories?
Well, respectfully, ma'am, I don't think you understand what Einstein did. The theory of relativity says nothing about God. Einstein's ideas about God were completely different from and separate from his scientific work. And what he didn't accept was that there could be fundamental indeterminacy in nature based on quantum mechanics, that there had to be some determinism at the bottom of that. But that says nothing about God. Einstein's belief in God was separate. I don't consider it that important. People hold him up as an icon about religion simply because he was one of the smartest physicists who ever lived. That gives him no special cachet and pronunciation.
Thank you. Brilliant.
Oh.
No, I'm brilliant, Dr. Coyne. Thank you. It gives him no special anything about that. Now, and last thing, I just want to
I think Carl, that's got to be the last. We got a lot of stuff to go. Thank you so much for the call.
Oh, really? You're going to hang up on me?
If you would like to follow up.
Okay, no. I had one last
That's
thing
it. Can you cut that? So I was going to say, you can send us something on Facebook. I'm happy to get Dr. Coyne's. Okay, thank you very much. So Dr. Coyne, thank you for answering that so graciously. Evolution at its simplest has three basic requirements: heredity, variation, and then a selective force that can act over time. Can you give us a more detailed 6 steps that you say are very important for the neo-Darwinian synthesis, what that's about?
Well, first of all, you're not quite correct. I mean, in what you said, evolution by natural selection requires variation, heredity, and something that directionally will change the different proportions of genes. But there is evolution that's not based on natural selection. There's a random evolution, caused by what we call genetic drift. The frequencies of the different mutants will just bounce around. If they have no difference that affects their reproduction, i.e. there's no natural selection operating. And that can be a form of evolution too, because evolution is defined as the change in the proportions of genes in a population. So those are the 3 things that are required for evolution by natural selection to happen. But there's more to the modern synthesis than simply that. I mean, I would add, that evolution occurs. That's a testable statement. That is part of the theory of evolution. I always say there's 5 parts to it. The other one is that it's gradual and based on changes in populations. That is, it takes thousands to millions of years instead of overnight. And what changes is not an individual. When a population evolves, the individuals themselves don't change. It's the proportion of individuals in a population that changes. Third, there's splitting. Not just a single lineage changes over time, but lineages can actually branch and create more different species. So we started off with one species about 3.7 billion years ago, and now we have anywhere between 5 and 50 million, that requires a sort of branching bush of evolution. So that's another stipulation of the theory, this splitting. The reverse side of that, which is the fourth part, is that if you take any two branches, you can trace them back to a common node, their sort of common ancestor. That is, all things, all species on Earth are related to one another. And the more related they are, the more recently they've branched off from their common ancestor. So those are two sides of the same thing. And the last part is that, what you mentioned, that the part of life that we regard as designoid, that is the features of organisms that make them look so well adapted to their environment, the woodpecker's beak, the cactus's spines, the camel's hump, and so on, are a result of natural selection. So, I mean, those are what I call the 5 constituents of evolution. Those are the things that in my book I tried to document by giving evidence for each one separately.
It's interesting. I also would like to add to that, and this is an aspect of evolution that people just, I think anyway, can't seem to grasp or put their minds around, is time. Okay, you need time for evolution to occur. It doesn't just, a lot of the creationist arguments or intelligent design arguments is you hear, well, I have not seen an elephant pop out of a dog, therefore evolution is false. Well, the gradual, as you said, gradual change. Can you maybe comment a little bit about, time and how speciation, some of the examples maybe of some time frame of speciation?
Yeah, well, evolution and speciation are different things, of course. Evolution is just change in a population. Speciation, which results from that, of course, is splitting. But they're both gradual, as you said. They can be rapid in the case of the Galapagos finches, which is the most famous example of evolution by natural selection in real time. You got a change in a finch's beak by 10% in 1 year. Because there was a drought, the smaller seeds died out, the plants were smaller seeds, and only the bigger finches had the beaks to handle the seeds that were left. So they all died en masse. The big ones were left. In one generation, there was a 10% change. So, I mean, people that say that they're not going to believe in evolution unless they see it in real time, that's one example. It's documented in Jonathan Wiener's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Beak of the Finch. Antibiotic resistance is another example. But a creationist will say, well, it's still a bacterium, or it's still a finch. So you need to then give examples of one thing, one kind turning into another kind, or examples of things splitting in nature. And we have those two, plenty of them, in my book. In my first book, which is a technical book called Speciation on my own field, I calculated that on average it takes about 1 million years to make a new species. So if you have a single lineage and it branches into two, you'd have to wait about 1 million years for that to happen. So of course we're not going to see that. Nevertheless, we can see it in the fossil record, where we see a lineage of fossils, and all of a sudden we see 2 different types of things that are sort of look like they came from that one thing. So we can see that. We've also seen special types of speciation occurring in real time, in plants in particular, over just a generation or 2. So there's no real problem with documenting that.
Yeah, can you define speciation? Because I was going to say, creationists, they like to hang on that word kind as if it's a loophole that lets them around it. And you describe in your book how plants of different species, explain how that happens, in a generation or 2.
Yeah, well, biologists don't use the term kinds, and creationists know that they can't really define a kind when they ask them. In fact, they have this whole area of inquiry called baraminology, where they're trying to figure out how many kinds there are. Of course, it's been wildly unsuccessful. The kinds have to fit on the ark, for one thing. So 70 million species aren't going to make it. So there has to be fewer. So what, is a dog and a cat, are they different kinds? So biologists don't deal with that kind of stuff. We consider species to be populations of organisms that are unable to produce a viable hybrid with another species in nature. So, for example, we are a different species from chimpanzees because although we live, at least in some areas, in contact with them, we can't produce hybrids with them. And believe me, that experiment was tried. It was unethical. They injected chimpanzee sperm into human females, I think. They did it one of the 2 ways, and it was unsuccessful. So, even if we were to copulate with a chimpanzee in nature, that's not the same thing as producing a hybrid with them. So we're regarded as different species. From our closest relative, chimps, we're separated by about 4 to 5 million years because we coexist in nature without producing viable hybrids. It's the same thing with all the birds outside in your yard: a sparrow, a starling, a pigeon, a cardinal. None of those birds can successfully hybridize with others. They're called different species. So the problem of speciation is how you start with a single lineage and split it up into two different lineages that cannot themselves exchange genes with each other. That is the problem with the origin of species that, sadly, Darwin didn't really solve in his book, despite the title of it, The Origin of Species.
And you've said that the flip side of speciation is common ancestors.
Correct.
Can you sort of walk us back through, humans to primates to mammals, and how we go all the way back to the earliest forms of life, so some of the things that we share all the way back?
Well, there's one thing we share with almost every species on Earth. That is the genetic code, for example. That's the reason, for example, one reason why we think that life originated only once. Because if it originated more than once, it's unlikely that we'd have the same genetic code. And by code, I mean the sequence of the chemical constituents of DNA form sort of a triplet code. So you have one DNA base, another DNA base, and a third DNA base, and each three of them code for a single part of an amino acid, a constituent of protein. Every organism, with very few exceptions, has the same code. If life had originated more than once, that wouldn't have happened. So, and that fundamental thing, and in fundamental aspects of our biochemistry, the fact that the amino acids that we all use are all in one direction, they're called L or left amino acids rather than right. Those have convinced biologists that there was one origin of life, and it also testifies that we all have common ancestry from that universal common ancestor, which probably lived somewhere about 3.6 billion years ago. In terms of us, well, as we go back and back, the best thing you could do, I mean, I'm not going to recount every common ancestor we have with everything, but Richard Dawkins' book, The Ancestor's Tale, is explicitly designed to do that. I mean, the first common ancestor we had was with the chimpanzee, the two species, the bonobo and the normal chimpanzee. So our tree looks like that. Here's us, here's the chimp and the bonobo. So that node here was about, 6 million years ago. Then you go back a little further and you find our common ancestor with the next most closely related species, the gorilla. That was 10 million years ago. Go back a little further and our common ancestor with the next closest relative, the orangutan, 13 million years. And so you go back further and further and further and you get to, primates, monkeys, lemurs, and then other mammals. And, the more closely related we are, the more recently in time we split off from our common ancestor. That's what we mean in evolution when we say closely related. It means we diverged from one species recently.
And recently is a relative term again.
We're talking, chimpanzees, it's 4 million years.
Yeah, and that's not, that's a long time. And as you said, your studies show that it takes about 1 million years to speciate. That's a long time.
On average, but it can be faster or slower.
Sure.
There are very few laws in biology like that. So.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. A lot of it has to do with many different, selection pressures. For example, one of recently I just read about the Cambrian explosion and how that's again something that the creationists like to attack. Also, is like, well, if things slowly moved, then explain the Cambrian explosion. And getting into a little bit of like evidence for evolution, we're looking at the Cambrian explosion being aided by changing geography and biogeography.
And maybe you can address that, because we don't have that much time and we've got so much to cover. Can you move into like the lines of evidence supporting evolution? And you said that biogeography is something you learned about while you were writing the book. Maybe you can go through some of that evidence in biogeography.
Well, yeah, it's complicated. I mean, that was Darwin's favorite subject because, he learned this when he was on the Beagle. And he has 2 chapters in The Origin of Species on biogeography. And he was really the first person to realize that biogeography, which it really means the distribution of plants and animals on the surface of the planet, if you looked at it with an inquiring mind, you'd realize that the only way to explain that would be evolution. The example I like to use is in oceanic islands, those islands that come up from beneath the bottom of the sea without any living things on them. Volcanic islands like Hawaii, like the Galapagos, things like that. Darwin realized, and the germ of this was in his voyage in the Beagle from 1831 to 1836, that those kinds of islands like Hawaii and the Galapagos and Lord Howe, which is another small island off of New Zealand, are very peculiar because they lack mammals, they lack amphibians, they lack reptiles, they lack freshwater fish. And it's weird because if all those animals are there because God put them there, why did he leave those animals off those islands? And yet if you look at islands that were once connected to continents, like Great Britain, for example, or Madagascar, continental islands, they have plenty of those things. So for some reason, why did God leave these, amphibians, mammals, reptiles, freshwater fish off of islands? And the creationists would say, well, maybe they couldn't live there. That's why God didn't put them there. But when you put them there, like when the cane toad invaded Hawaii, which is amphibian, or the mongoose, they take over. So it's not that the islands are unsuitable for these forms of life. It's, it's that they didn't get there and form new species. So what we see on islands are lots of plants, lots of insects, and lots of birds, and we're missing these other forms of life. The only possible explanation for that is that the life on islands, which is endemic, if you go to the Galapagos, a lot of the species are found only there, got there from the mainland and then evolved in situ in geographic isolation. That's one thing. The other thing that Darwin noticed is if you look at the kinds of life on oceanic islands, the things that resemble it most but aren't exactly the same are there's life on the nearest mainland. So if you look at the finches of the Galapagos, or the plants, for example, the things that look most like them are on the west coast of South America, which is the closest land. So that all fits together in that, species get to islands by rare events of dispersal, and the kinds of species that can get there are insects, birds, and plants, because they can float, fly, or be pooped out by birds. And then they form new species in isolation from the mainland, but they get there from the nearest mainland. That's just one bit of the kind of evidence that Darwin realized could be put together as evidence for evolution. There's no creationist explanation for the way life is on islands, as far as I can tell. And I've never seen any of them try to explain it.
Can you wrap up the biogeography with telling us how marsupials, what science predicted and what it finally found?
Yeah, I mentioned this in the book. I'll try to be brief. Marsupials actually evolved, we're not quite sure, but they evolved in either Eurasia or North America. And we know that from the first marsupial fossils are located in those regions before you find them in Australia. And we can see them, if you look in the fossils, spreading down through South America. Right. And then now there's only a few marsupials left in what we call Eurasia and the New World, North and South America. The possum is one example of that. But they're all over Australia. Okay, so how do they get there, given that they evolved in Eurasia? Well, they must have gotten there somehow. Mammals can't swim, not that distance. But then people realized that during the period that marsupials were evolving, Australia was connected to Antarctica and it was connected to South America. So if marsupials got to Australia in this land bridge that no longer exists, millions of years ago, then you would predict that you would find them in Antarctica. That was a prediction. This is based on the theory of evolution. Plus the observation that you see them first in North and South America and Eurasia. Sure enough, an expedition to Antarctica not that long ago, I can't remember the year, found marsupial fossils of the right age. Right. So Antarctica was not cold then. It was, it was more temperate, and so mammals could cross it. And there's tons of predictions like that evolutionists have made and verified that give more and more strength to the theory every year.
I think it's just a great story to demonstrate the predictive value of science. That science does solve things, and what has creationism done for us lately?
Yeah, and I was going to say the predictability and actually, observing those predictions or testing those predictions and coming through. One of the every once in a while I'll do an after-school talk on evolution and creation, and one of the things I like to talk about is convergent evolution, and you see that with marsupials as well as mammals and other mammals in the rest of the world. For example, one of the best examples I like to use are flying squirrels. We have flying squirrels here as we have sugar gliders, the marsupial version of it in Australia, and that shows, not only that they're related, but also that they evolved based on their selective pressures, ecological niches, so to speak. So I always
it tells us something about evolution. I wouldn't use convergence as a sort of proof of evolution.
No, not proof, but it's an example. Example of
the flying squirrels. There's one in Australia and one in North America. But it does show that there are certain principles of evolution, certain pathways that are less resistant than others to go down, which is a cool feature of evolution too. So.
Maybe we can tie this next one into it. We had a viewer question that I'm going to change a little bit. It was about are sperm little humans. I know that you actually, I think you've done, yeah, I'm not sure exactly where that was. But maybe you can talk about embryology. And Darwin, you said, considered that his strongest evidence. So if you want to either go with embryology, or you also, I think, you talk about sperm competition.
I'll just give one example of that, which I give in my popular talk. Which is that development. So there's all these different areas that converge in giving evidence for evolution. We just talked about one, biogeography. There's the fossil record. There's molecular biology, where you look at DNA sequences. There's embryology, which is completely different. You could, and when Darwin wrote The Origin of Species in 1859, we didn't have much of a fossil record. I mean, we knew that earlier life was different from modern life, but we didn't have any examples of transitions in the fossil record. It wasn't that good then. So Darwin convinced most scientists and most thinking people within a decade after that book that evolution was true without any fossils. And it's because of other areas like embryology, for example. Here's one example of embryological evidence for evolution that I like to use. It's dolphins and other marine mammals. If you look at them as embryos, they start growing legs at about 2 or 3 weeks of age. They form front limb buds and hind limb buds, just like we do. If you look at a human embryo and a dolphin embryo at age, they look pretty much the same. They both have a stump up here, a stump here, and then 2 bottom stumps. And in humans and other tetrapods, 4-footed animals, those limb buds form into front legs and back legs. The dolphin also starts forming them, but then the rear buds get resorbed again. You know, so. And you can ask yourself, well, why do they start forming these things that turn into legs in other creatures, but then they disappear? And occasionally, they don't disappear. A dolphin will develop legs that sort of look like this and stick out from the rear. And you could dissect those, and in there you'll find things that look very much like the limb bones, the real limb bones of humans, you know, femurs, tibias, and fibulas. How do you explain that? The only way possible, which is prediction of evolution, is that these marine mammals evolved from land mammals, and they still retain some of the genetic information for making hind legs. And occasionally that's expressed. It's expressed as embryos, but then, you know, that developmental pathway shuts down. That's one of the ways that evolution got rid of the hind leg when we invaded the waters. There's no way that I can see that the theory of creationism could explain why God would make these useless features in embryos and then take them away. I mean, we have a coat of hair when we're 6 months old, like an ape, all of us do, and then that hair falls off before we're born. Now, why is that? It's because we were descended from hairy mammals, and that developmental program is aborted somewhere during gestation.
And not just that, I mean, we actually figured out the mechanisms with toolkit genes. My understanding is why this happens in embryos during development. And I know there's been plenty of studies where researchers have toyed with these toolkit genes during embryological development in chickens and things like that, and then making, you know, kind of toying with that.
You know, you can, that's another, I mean, that's a completely different way of looking at evolution too. You make predictions, for example, that, well, here's another one. I mean, we have genes that make egg yolks, but those genes are dead. They've been rendered ineffective by mutations. That's not really a prediction, because those genes might have been rendered so dead that we wouldn't be able to detect them. But the fact that we find them in our genome testifies to the fact that we have common ancestors with reptiles and amphibians that do have egg yolk. And in fact, our egg yolk genes are pretty much the same as theirs, except that they don't make anything.
Right.
So, you know, how do you explain that? You can say, if you believe in God, that God was a jokester. He wanted to make things look like we evolved, but we really didn't evolve. But most religious people don't like the idea of a sort of prankster deity. You know, they'll try to get around it in other ways. The most they do is they'll probably try to avoid that question and just say, well, we don't have any good fossil evidence for evolution, you know.
Most of the apologists try to filter the type of science they present as evidence in order to, you know, present their case. Obviously, they're not very well versed in things like, you know, genetics and embryology and toolkit genes and things like that. So they, you know, to them, they got it figured out. And to the people, and going back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the show about scientific literacy, people who are not very scientifically literate or don't understand science very well, they hear somebody, an apologist, what they think is a slam dunk case, and now you have this issue. But
some of them are, some of the creationists, particularly intelligent design people, they're pretty well versed in the science. I mean, Stephen Meyer, for example, who wrote a book on the Cambrian explosion, which he said shows that God made it happen all at once, basically. He knows the data pretty well. It's just that he can't accept it as evidence for evolution. Well, when you're that blinkered by religion, you can be really, really smart about science, but you're blind to it. That's what religion will do to you. It makes you impervious to evidence.
Yeah, and that's, as my friend calls it, it's delusion, basically, is what it is.
Yeah, I don't know if, I mean, religion itself I would consider delusion, as Richard's book. But what people don't realize is how strongly it blinds people to the facts. There's one figure I give in my new book, a Time magazine Roper poll taken in 2006, where they asked Americans, if you found a scientific fact that incontrovertibly disproved one of the tenets of your religion, what would you do? And you got three choices. You give up that religious tenet, you say the scientific fact is wrong, or you don't know what to do. And 64% of Americans, nearly 2 in 3, said that they would discard the scientific fact and keep their religious tenet. So that's what we're facing. This kind of denialism, which is so strongly based on religion that even when you have a fact right before your eyes, you cannot accept it because your religion says you can.
Yeah, I think maybe that's a good segue. We just have about 6 minutes left. I'd like to spend some time talking about why you decided to write your book that's coming out in the summer. Because I guess you decided from the first one, just giving facts isn't enough. That's not what's stopping people from understanding it. So tell us about your new book and what prompted you.
Yeah, it's very briefly. It's called, you can get it on Amazon actually. It's for sale even though it's not coming out until May. It's called Faith versus Fact, Why Science and Religion Are Incompatible. I wrote it because as science pushes forward and religion moves backwards, one of the tactics that people use is to pretend that science and religion are sort of partners. They're either helping each other in some way, or that they're not incompatible with one another, or that each one of them has its own sphere of influence. Religion handles meanings and morals and values. Science does the facts of the world. That was Steve Gould's tactic. And I realized that this is not only wrong, it's they are incompatible. You can't really act scientifically and act religiously at the same time and consider yourself behaving coherently. They're also harmful to science because it gives people the idea, at least some of the people that push this compatibility view, that superstition or reasoning based on revelation or dogma is sort of on a par with what you find with science, empirical evidence, reason, testability, the whole apparatus of science. So to believe in realities, and I guess the thesis of the book is that in many ways religion is a science and that it makes claims about the real world. It's not just, it's all love and wonder and beauty, but people believe in real things like gods and hell and heaven and angels. The Pope himself, who accepts evolution, believes in demons and angels. So they make truth claims. But the truth claims are, so those are scientific claims, and they can be falsified sometimes. I mean, the religious claims of an instantaneous creation, or the religious claims that there was a great flood, those can be falsified. Others are harder. But all of them derive from a completely different methodology of science. So what we have is two areas that both make claims about the truth. One of them has ways to determine whether those claims are right. The other one doesn't. That's why we have one science and thousands of religions all making disparate claims. So, what I wanted to do is try to dispel in my book this view that science and religion are complementary, partners, they can help each other, or even that religion can find out anything about the cosmos. I would claim it can't, because its methods, which are revelation, dogma, and authority, are incapable of finding truth about the universe.
I want to give you a chance to dispel another myth. You have a great quote about the reason many liberal theologians see religion and evolution as harmonious is that they espouse a theology not only alien but unrecognizable as religion to most Americans. Can you talk about the run-of-the-mill religious person versus your polished apologist?
Yeah, that's the problem. I mean, and I'm sure I'm going to be attacked on this. I've been attacked on this before. So is Richard and many other atheists, saying, well, you're just painting a caricature of religion. I mean, true religion doesn't believe in stuff like the Bible. It doesn't believe in these fact claims. It's some sophisticated ground of being, you know, politic type of religion. And indeed, many religionists like Karen Armstrong, she's one of the more noxious practitioners of that genre, believe that. But, you know, this is one thing, again, I do in my book at the very beginning. I try to establish that that is not what the average person thinks of as their religion. And you can do that by taking polls, you know. Right. So 85% of Americans, for example, are certain that God exists. 70% of them believe in hell and in angels. It's always around 60, 70%, you know. The afterlife, 60 to 70%. That's not sophisticated theology. That's basic biblical literalism. And if you ask Christians the sort of question about the non-negotiable, the one non-negotiable of all theologians, sophisticated or not, is Christ's resurrection, because so much depends on that. That is a truth claim, and you can't get around it with Adam and Eve is another one. That's a bedrock claim of the Catholic Church. Those are truth claims that, I mean, granted, they're hard to adjudicate. The Adam and Eve one has been dispelled, by the way.
Sure.
But most people believe in tangible, real things about the universe, like a God who's a mind without a body, for example. And that's very different from sophisticated theology. So you can go after the sophisticated theologians, as I have a little bit in my book. I go back and forth between them. But when you do that, you're neglecting the vast majority of religious believers in the world who see God as a more personal being, who see heaven and hell as real, things like that. So, you know, those are truth claims.
Right.
If you see, the only kind of religion that is compatible with science is one that makes no claims at all about the truth. And that would be sort of a pantheism, I think, the kind that Einstein, I think, had. I mean, the woman said Einstein, you know, was shocked because he believed in a personal God. Of course, he didn't. Einstein was a pantheist. He thought that the universe was God, and that the wonder before the universe was humans' form of expressing their religious feelings. Now, if you consider that religion, then that's compatible with science, because, of course, the universe exists, and we can investigate it, and there's no problem with wondering about it. I mean, after all, it is a pretty amazing place. So, but any other form of religion, anything that makes claims about deities, about miraculous actions, about resurrections, about demons and angels, those claims are based on a different kind of knowledge, if you can call it that, than science is, and that makes it incompatible with science.
We're getting ready to run out of time here, but we do want to thank you. We want to carry on this conversation at some point, so we hope you come back. But thanks for joining us.
Yeah, and if anybody's interested in learning more why evolution is true, you can take a look on Dr. Coyne's blog by the same name, Why Evolution is True. Take a look on Amazon at some of the reviews. It's a wonderful book, and thank you for spending your afternoon with us.
My pleasure.
All right, and people tune in next week for another episode of Road to Reason.